Amid the rapid escalation of the trade confrontation between China and the United States, Canada has unexpectedly found itself at the center of a new geopolitical drama. It might have seemed unlikely that Ottawa would become a target of pressure from Washington, but the great chess game of major powers is already gaining momentum, and Canada is being forced to respond. In recent months, the Trump administration has intensified its rhetoric toward Beijing with new tariffs, investment restrictions, and bold declarations about taking back control of global supply chains, all perceived in Beijing as aggressive escalation. Naturally, China is responding in kind, and tensions on the trade front are rising week by week. In this environment, Canada, as one of the largest trading partners of the United States and deeply integrated with the American economy, could not remain on the sidelines. According to insiders in Canadian and U.S. government circles, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney recently visited Washington to meet with key figures in the White House and Congress. Sources say he delivered a tough but well-reasoned statement, leaving a clear signal in Washington that reportedly enraged Donald Trump, but at the same time forced him to reconsider his rhetoric. Some within the U.S. establishment allegedly admitted that Carney's arguments were hard to counter. The essence of Carney's message was simple and uncompromising. Canada is highly dependent on the United States not only in trade, but also in security, energy, and infrastructure. However, if Washington continues its pressure and threats, Canada will no longer be able to consider the United States a reliable guarantor of its security. Carney, according to his allies, warned that Ottawa would be forced to seek alternative guarantees, and that the only player capable of providing them could be China. According to insiders, the Canadian government is already considering scenarios of a pivot to the east. One source said Carney directly described Trump's increasingly aggressive policy as a threatening challenge after which U.S. allies must reassess their commitments, and even more, that if this trend continues, Canada is ready to follow China's path by entering into a strategic partnership that until now was considered unlikely. For Beijing, this would be a sensational victory, taking away one of the closest U.S. allies and placing China as a key player on the border of the American continent. Media outlets from Hong Kong and Beijing report that Chinese officials have already begun testing the waters. Through diplomatic channels, special envoys, and economic instruments, China is trying to find out what Canada is ready for, what security guarantees it would accept, and how a new strategic partnership could be formalized. According to analysts from the Globe and Mail and the Washington Post, such shifts could be a serious blow to U.S. hegemony in North America. If Canada begins open negotiations with China, the United States will find itself strategically surrounded to the north, a perfect scenario for another talk show storm in Washington and a propaganda victory for Beijing. Yet in the shadows of this story lies a question: can Canada truly break its ties with the United States? Prime Minister Mark Carney, according to sources, warned that Ottawa is not inclined toward impulsive moves and that a turn toward China would be a last resort if American aggression does not subside. Behind the scenes, the White House is already discussing the possibility of softening its rhetoric toward Canada to avoid losing an ally that for years has been part of transit, defense, and energy networks. Among U.S. intelligence officials, there is a view that Carney, with his diplomatic credibility, may have pressured Trump to temporarily step back from a destructive line toward Canada. After all, losing Canada from the NATO strategic bloc would not only be a geopolitical loss, but also a blow to Washington's prestige and another argument for those criticizing Trump's foreign policy. The key question now is whether the White House can withstand pressure from the West and whether Carney's diplomatic sting will influence Washington's future course. Will the tone soften, or will open confrontation begin? Canada, though a quiet partner, could become the arena of a new great game between East and West. The story took an unexpected turn just days after Mark Carney returned from Washington. Canadian media reported that Ottawa held a closed meeting of the National Security Council to discuss potential scenarios if the trade war between the United States and China spirals out of control. According to sources from CBC and Reuters, the meeting was attended by representatives of the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the intelligence community. The main issue was how Canada should act if the United States begins applying sanctions not only against China, but also against countries that maintain trade relations with it. Such measures have already been discussed within the Trump administration and, according to American experts, may become the next step in the pressure campaign. One participant at the meeting, speaking anonymously, said that for the first time in decades, Canada is considering the possibility of an alternative alliance to secure strategic autonomy. Among the options being discussed is closer cooperation with China through the Arctic Council and in the energy sector, particularly regarding Chinese investment in northern regions. Analysts note that if China gains access to Canada's Arctic ports and resources, it would shift the geopolitical balance in the region and create an extremely uncomfortable situation for the United States, which for the first time in history risks facing a strategic rival not just across the ocean, but on its northern border. Against this backdrop, Chinese diplomacy has begun acting more actively. A forum in Beijing included statements that China is ready to offer Canada a new architecture of security and economic prosperity based on equality and non-interference. According to the Chinese outlet Global Times, a delegation of Canadian business leaders has already arrived in Shanghai for talks with China's Ministry of Commerce. Discussions cover investments in transport corridors, green energy, and telecommunications. According to Bloomberg analysts, the talks are being conducted under strict secrecy and participants avoid press comments. Washington, according to Politico sources, has already expressed deep concern and is preparing countermeasures. The Trump administration is considering reviewing agreements on energy and aviation technology supplies to Canada to demonstrate the consequences of excessive closeness to China. Some Republicans in Congress have even proposed temporarily restricting Canadian companies' access to U.S. defense contracts. Experts believe this could become a turning point. If Trump decides to pressure Canada, it will only accelerate Ottawa's rapprochement with Beijing. Meanwhile, according to diplomatic sources at the United Nations, China is preparing an initiative to create a Pacific Partnership Forum, which may include Indonesia, Malaysia, and even Mexico alongside Canada. This could serve as a response to the US-led AUKUS alliance and turn the Pacific region into an arena of new economic and military confrontation. Thus, Mark Carney's visit to Washington may go down in history as a turning point, after which Canada, for the first time in decades, began to realize that its national interests no longer fully align with those of the United States. For China, this is the opportunity Xi Jinping has long dreamed of to establish a foothold in the Western Hemisphere and deprive America of its closest ally. For Trump, it is a new test of his America First strategy. And although both countries continue to speak of partnership in public, behind closed doors the message grows louder. A new era of distrust between Ottawa and Washington has begun.